It began like any other ordinary Thursday in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. The kind of morning that slips into memory unnoticed, except for what happened next. On February 11, 2002, Brenda Heist kissed her children goodbye, dropped them off at school, and drove away in her silver Pontiac. To the casual eye, it was routine, mundane even, just another parent navigating the rhythm of suburban life. But what no one could have predicted was that this short drive would be the last time her family saw her for more than a decade. By evening, panic had already begun to take root. Brenda didn't return home. Dinner went cold, calls went unanswered. Hours stretched into a night filled with pacing, worry, and whispered prayers. Her husband, Lee Heist, grew frantic. He called neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen her. But Brenda had vanished into the silence of her absence. The police were called. Officers canvassed the area. The family clung to hope that perhaps she had car trouble or that she'd stopped unexpectedly at a friend's house. But the first lead came quickly and only deepened the mystery. Her car was found abandoned in a nearby town, just 30 miles away. The vehicle was locked. Nothing was missing. The keys weren't in the ignition, and there were no signs of struggle. Detectives crouched by the car, studying every detail. To them, it was both too clean and too suspicious. If she walked away, where did she go? And if something happened here, why no trace? Rumors spread fast through the small community. Some whispered about foul play, others about an affair or secret life. Neighbors, once quick with friendly smiles, now exchanged uneasy glances. Her family was left paralyzed in the chaos. Lee Heist tried to stay strong for their two children, then just 8 and 12 years old. But behind closed doors, the weight of not knowing crushed him. His wife of years, the mother of his children, had simply evaporated from their lives. The investigation grew quickly. Local officers called in state police. Before long, the FBI joined, combing through Brenda's finances, her phone records, her relationships. They set up tip lines. Flyers went up across Pennsylvania. Missing mother of 2, the posters read. Brenda's photo, smiling, approachable, eyes bright, stared back at grocery store patrons, gas station customers, and strangers across state lines. Yet, despite the flood of resources, there were no leads. Not a single credible sighting. No credit card charges, no ATM withdrawals. Brenda Heist had vanished without leaving a footprint. For her children, the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Every knock at the door jolted them. Every phone call sparked hope. But each time, disappointment followed. Their mother was gone, and the world seemed no closer to explaining why. The investigation pressed on, but without evidence of foul play, detectives were stuck in limbo. "We have no body, no witness, no crime scene," one officer admitted in frustration during a press briefing. "It's as if she stepped off the earth." For years, that haunting phrase clung to the case. She simply disappeared. By 2010, after 8 long years of searching, after birthdays and holidays had passed, with one chair always empty, Brenda Heist was declared legally dead. Her children, teenagers now, faced the brutal finality of paperwork that said what their hearts could not accept. Their mother was gone. And yet what no one knew, not the family, not the neighbors, not the investigators who'd pored over every angle, was that Brenda wasn't dead at all. She was alive. She had walked away. Why she left, where she went, and how she survived would only come to light more than a decade later. But on that February morning in 2002, her absence cracked open a wound that would never fully heal, leaving behind questions that screamed louder with each passing year. And when the truth finally surfaced, it stunned everyone. Because sometimes the most unthinkable mystery isn't murder or abduction.
Sometimes it's the choice to vanish.
To understand the shock of Brenda Heist's vanishing act, you have to know who she was before that February morning in 2002. Because on the surface, Brenda was not the kind of woman anyone expected to disappear without a trace. Born and raised in small-town Pennsylvania, Brenda was known for her easy laugh and approachable warmth. Friends described her as the kind of neighbor who'd bring over a casserole after a surgery, the kind of mother who always showed up for parent-teacher conferences. She wasn't flashy or reckless, she was steady, dependable, the type of woman who kept her bills paid and her kids' homework signed. By her late 30s, Brenda had what most would consider a typical suburban life. She and her husband, Lee Heist, lived in Lidditz, a tidy town with tree-lined streets and neighbors who waved from porches. They were raising 2 children, an older daughter and a younger son. To outsiders, they looked like any ordinary family. School drop-offs, weekend soccer games, cookouts in the backyard. But what neighbors couldn't see was the slow unraveling beneath the surface. Brenda's marriage had grown tense. She and Lee had once been high school sweethearts, but years of financial stress and quiet resentments had driven a wedge between them. Arguments that started small, about bills, about chores, about late nights at work, grew sharper. The tone of their home shifted from partnership to distance. Money was always a pressure point. Lee's work was steady but modest, and Brenda took on cleaning jobs to help cover expenses. The bills seemed to grow faster than the paychecks. Brenda carried the burden quietly, rarely letting friends know just how tight things had become. But in her journal, later recovered by family, she scribbled phrases that revealed the weight on her shoulders. "I feel like I'm drowning. I don't know how much longer I can do this. The kids deserve better than the stress we live in every day." Friends recalled moments when Brenda seemed distracted, far away in thought. At a PTA meeting, she once sat through an entire discussion without speaking, her eyes glazed as if somewhere else entirely. When asked if she was okay, she brushed it off with a smile. Just tired. But the exhaustion went deeper than fatigue. By 2002, Brenda was facing more than just money troubles. Divorce loomed on the horizon. The marriage, already fragile, had begun to fracture completely. The idea of starting over, alone, broke, and responsible for 2 children, terrified her.
One neighbor later recalled, "She seemed like she was at a breaking point, but we all thought, she's strong, she'll figure it out. No one imagined she'd just vanish." Brenda's children, still young, had no idea of the turmoil swirling in their parents' relationship. For them, their mother was the anchor, the one who made sure backpacks were ready for school, who tucked them in at night, who smoothed over the tension in the house with hugs and reassurance. But even anchors can snap under enough strain. On the day she disappeared, Brenda was supposed to meet with a lawyer about the divorce. It weighed heavily on her, not just as an ending, but as a judgment on every effort she'd made to hold her family together. To her, it wasn't just the collapse of a marriage, it was the collapse of an identity. Later, when Brenda resurfaced, she would describe the mental storm she felt in those days. "I didn't think I could handle it," she admitted. "I thought I was failing everyone, my kids, my husband, myself. I couldn't see a way out." Looking back, the signs of collapse were there. The mounting financial pressures, the loneliness inside her marriage, the exhaustion of juggling too many roles with too few resources. But hindsight is cruelly clear in ways the present never is. To those around her in early 2002, Brenda Heist was still the mom dropping her kids at school, still the woman who smiled politely in the grocery store aisle, still the friend who said she was fine when asked. But behind closed doors, she was a woman unraveling. And soon her unraveling would take a shocking form. Not an argument, not a breakdown, but a disappearance so sudden, so absolute, it would leave her children believing their mother had either been taken or was dead. What no one imagined was that Brenda, faced with choices she felt she couldn't survive, would make one that would haunt everyone she left behind.
She would simply walk away.
The morning of February 11, 2002 began like so many others in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. Winter had settled over the town, a gray chill clinging to the air. Children shuffled into school bundled in coats, steam rising from the exhaust of idling buses. Parents hurried off to jobs, errands, and the rhythms of daily life. For Brenda Heist, it should have been another ordinary Monday. She woke early, packed lunches for her 2 children, and drove them to school. Neighbors later recalled seeing her Pontiac pull into the drop-off lane. Nothing unusual about the scene. She hugged her kids, kissed them on the forehead, and promised to see them after school. But that promise would not be kept. What happened next remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in Pennsylvania's recent history. Instead of driving home, or to the grocery store, or to her cleaning job, Brenda's path diverted. Somewhere between the school and her next destination, a decision was made. Sudden, life-altering, irreversible. By late afternoon, the first signs of worry appeared. Brenda's children waited in the pickup area, watching car after car pull forward. Their mother never arrived. A neighbor eventually drove them home, assuming Brenda had been delayed. But hours passed. Dinner went uneaten. Calls to Brenda's phone went unanswered. By 9 p.m., panic consumed the household. Lee Heist, her husband, contacted friends, relatives, anyone who might have seen her. No one had. The following morning, police were called. Officers began the familiar process, retracing steps, checking hospitals, calling local jails. By mid-morning, a breakthrough of sorts arrived. Brenda's Pontiac had been found 30 miles away in a nearby town, parked neatly in a residential area. The doors were locked. No valuables were missing. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no blood, no fingerprints that shouldn't have been there. It was as if she had simply stepped out of the car and melted into the air. Detectives crouched by the vehicle, puzzled. If she was abducted, one investigator remarked, there'd be signs. If she walked away, where did she go? The car felt staged, too clean, too undisturbed. The investigation swelled rapidly. Flyers bearing Brenda's photo were printed in bulk. Her smiling face, shoulder-length blonde hair, approachable eyes was pinned to telephone poles, taped to shop windows, stuffed into mailboxes. "Missing mother of 2, the headline screamed in bold.
The community rallied. Volunteers scoured wooded areas, combed through back roads, and checked abandoned properties. The local fire department organized search parties. Helicopters were deployed in the days that followed, their rotors chopping the cold February air as spotters scanned fields below. But no trace was found. The lack of evidence was haunting. Typically, missing person cases offered some breadcrumb, a credit card swipe, a witness sighting, a trail of phone calls. But in Brenda's case, nothing. No purchases, no ATM withdrawals. Her phone went silent. Her bank account sat untouched. For her children, the confusion was unbearable. They asked questions their father couldn't answer. Where's Mom? Did someone take her? When is she coming back? Lee Heist did his best to reassure them, but behind his forced calm was dread. His wife of years had simply vanished. Whispers spread through Lidditz. Some speculated that Brenda had been kidnapped, perhaps dragged into her own car. Others wondered if she'd walked away, but to where? And why leave her children behind? Investigators dug into her life. They learned about the stress she'd been under, looming divorce, money troubles, long nights of quiet despair. But stress alone didn't explain vanishing without a trace. Detectives searched for secret bank accounts, hidden passports, signs of a lover. They found none. At a press conference weeks later, the police chief summarized their frustration. "We have no body, no witness, no evidence of foul play. It's as if she stepped off the earth." As days bled into weeks, the frenzy quieted. replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The posters weathered in the wind, the tip line grew quiet, reporters moved on to the next case. But inside the Heist household, time seemed frozen. 2 children still set the dinner table for 3. 2 children still looked for their mother's face in every crowd. And Lee, exhausted by grief, struggled to carry the weight of both roles, mother and father, provider and protector, while the shadow of unanswered questions loomed over every corner of their home. Brenda Heist was missing. And for everyone who loved her, the worst part wasn't just the absence, it was the not knowing.
The first few days of a disappearance are the most critical. Detectives know that after 72 hours, the trail grows cold and the chances of solving the case shrink dramatically. In Brenda Heist's case, those first days yielded almost nothing. Her Pontiac sat parked 30 miles from her home, locked and undisturbed. There were no witnesses who remembered seeing her get out of the car, no surveillance footage in the area, no signs of a struggle, no discarded belongings, no footprints in the nearby mud. For investigators, it was a maddening void. The police scoured Brenda's home in Lidditz. They interviewed her husband Lee multiple times, pressing him for details about the morning she vanished. He told them she dropped the kids at school and never came back. Detectives asked if they had argued, if there was tension in the marriage. Lee admitted things had been strained, that divorce papers were being discussed, but he insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Still, suspicion lingered. In many missing person cases, law enforcement starts with those closest to the victim. Husbands, boyfriends, partners, they're often the first and sometimes the last suspects. For weeks, Lee Heist lived under that shadow. His neighbors whispered. Reporters asked blunt questions. Some of Brenda's own relatives wondered privately if he knew more than he was saying. Lee maintained his innocence. "I didn't hurt her," he told police, his voice shaking with frustration. "I just want her back." Investigators cast a wider net. They combed through Brenda's financial records. No credit card transactions appeared after her disappearance. Her checking account sat untouched. No unusual withdrawals had been made in the days prior. If she had planned to run away, she hadn't stockpiled cash. If someone else had taken her, they hadn't used her cards.
Detectives checked hospitals, homeless shelters, bus depots. They sent flyers to airports and train stations. They interviewed coworkers and friends, asking if Brenda had ever mentioned leaving. Some said she seemed tired, stressed, not herself. One friend recalled Brenda once muttering, "Sometimes I just wish I could walk away." But no one had taken it literally. As weeks stretched into months, the search broadened. The FBI became involved, reviewing the case for signs of abduction. Agents interviewed dozens of people, from neighbors to distant relatives. Psychologists were brought in to profile possibilities. Was Brenda abducted by a stranger? Had she staged her disappearance? Had she suffered a mental break and wandered off? But each theory ended in dead ends. The toll on the Heist family deepened with every passing season. Brenda's children, just 8 and 12 when she vanished, were forced to navigate school plays, soccer games, and birthdays without their mother in the audience. They asked questions their father couldn't answer. Did Mommy get lost? Is she coming back? Lee tried to be both strong and gentle, but his own grief was raw. He faced not only the absence of his wife, but the insinuations that he might be responsible. Police cars parked outside his house. Detectives knocked at odd hours, circling back with the same questions. Where were you that morning? Did she say anything unusual? The community, too, was divided. Some rallied around Lee and the children, bringing casseroles, offering to babysit, donating to search funds. Others whispered theories, dark ones, over fences and at church picnics. Years passed, and the case hardened into something detectives dreaded most, a cold file. In 2010, after 8 long years, Brenda Heist was officially declared dead in absentia. For her children, now teenagers, the declaration felt like a final betrayal. A death certificate was issued, not because a body had been found, but because time had erased the hope of finding her alive. For Lee, the legal death allowed him to move forward, at least on paper, but emotionally, the wound remained unhealed. He told a local paper, "There's no closure when you don't know. There's only a hole." Behind the scenes, investigators still puzzled over the case. They reopened leads every so often, chasing tips that trickled in from across the country. A woman matching Brenda's description spotted in Ohio. A homeless person in New Jersey who called herself Brenda. A woman in Florida arrested for vagrancy who refused to give her name. Each time, hope flickered, only to be extinguished when fingerprints didn't match. To the public, Brenda Heist was another tragic statistic, another missing mother, lost to the cruel uncertainty of life. But what no one knew, what no one could imagine, was that Brenda wasn't dead. She wasn't locked in a basement or buried in an unmarked grave. She was alive, surviving on the margins of society, walking streets where no one would recognize her, carrying the weight of a secret too heavy to reveal. The investigation had grown cold, but Brenda's story was far from over.
The truth, when it finally emerged in 2013, was almost stranger than fiction. While police in Pennsylvania chased leads and her family clung to hope or suspicion, Brenda Heist had been alive, living a life so far removed from the tidy suburb of Lidditz that it defied imagination. It all began the day she disappeared in 2002. Overwhelmed after dropping off her children, weighed down by a looming divorce and a financial storm she couldn't navigate, Brenda stopped at a local park. She sat on a bench, tears streaming, wondering if her world had finally collapsed for good. It was there she met a group of drifters. They were strangers, 3 men and a woman, talking about hitchhiking to Florida. They noticed her crying, asked what was wrong. Brenda, exhausted and vulnerable, poured out her story. The divorce, the money struggles, the feeling that she was failing everyone around her. "Come with us," one of them said casually. "Start over." It was an impulsive invitation. Most people would have laughed, shaken their head, and gone home. But Brenda didn't. Something inside her broke loose in that moment. The tether to her old life snapped. She got up, climbed into their car, and left Pennsylvania behind. For the first time in her life, Brenda didn't look back. The next years were a blur of survival. They hitchhiked south, sleeping under bridges, in tents, in abandoned buildings. She panhandled for food, showered at gas stations, and wore clothes scavenged from donation bins. Days melted into nights, and nights into weeks, each one about nothing more than making it to the next. Brenda later described those years with a mix of shame and disbelief. She said, "I ate out of dumpsters, I begged strangers for change, I slept in places I wouldn't want to describe. Every day was about surviving, not living." In Florida, she drifted from town to town. Sometimes she found odd jobs, cleaning houses, working in kitchens, washing cars, but always under assumed names, always for cash. She never stayed long. When questions came, she moved on. Her appearance changed dramatically. The vibrant suburban mother in family photos was replaced by a thin, weathered woman with tangled hair and sunburned skin. Her once bright eyes grew shadowed by exhaustion. "I didn't recognize myself," she admitted years later, "but I didn't want to." The drifters she had left Pennsylvania with eventually scattered. Some were arrested, others disappeared into different corners of the country. Brenda Heist remained in Florida, too afraid and too ashamed to return home. Too lost to carve out a stable existence. She spent nights curled under highway overpasses, clutching a bag of scavenged belongings. She slept on beaches when the weather was warm enough, in the doorways of shops when it wasn't. Hunger gnawed at her constantly. Loneliness became a second skin. And yet, she survived. What haunted her most weren't the dangers of homelessness, though they were real and constant. It was the knowledge of what she had left behind. Her children, her family. Every day she thought of them. She wondered if they hated her, if they believed she was dead, if they cried for her. But the shame grew heavier with each passing year, making the distance between them feel impossible to cross. In those years, Brenda Heist lived a kind of half-life, alive but invisible, breathing but unseen. She was declared legally dead in 2010. But in reality, she was wandering streets in Florida, eating scraps, working menial jobs,
and sleeping wherever she could find a patch of ground. She had chosen disappearance over confrontation, survival over responsibility. And though she endured more than a decade of hardship, the pain of what she left behind never loosened its grip. One investigator later reflected, "The hardest cases aren't always the ones where someone is killed. Sometimes it's when someone chooses to walk away, because the family is left with ghosts and the missing person is left with guilt." Brenda Heist was alive, yes, but for over 11 years she lived as if she wasn't.
While Brenda Heist drifted through the streets of Florida, her family in Pennsylvania was trapped in a different kind of survival. Life without her was not only painful, but filled with suspicion, judgment, and a void that never seemed to close. Her two children, just 8 and 12 when their mother vanished, had to grow up overnight. The first weeks after Brenda's disappearance were the hardest. At school, their classmates whispered behind their backs. Teachers gave them pitying looks. Every day felt like living under a spotlight they had never asked for. The older child, suddenly thrust into a protective role, tried to comfort the younger. "Mom will come back," they whispered at night, clutching hands beneath the covers. But as the days turned into months, hope frayed. The empty chair at the dinner table became a permanent fixture. Birthdays passed with a single candle lit for someone who wasn't there to blow it out. Lee Heist carried the heaviest weight. Overnight, he became both mother and father, provider and comforter, protector and scapegoat. He cooked, cleaned, packed lunches, and tried to soothe tears, all while fielding questions from detectives who often looked at him with suspicion. Neighbors didn't make it easier. Some rallied, offering meals and babysitting, but others whispered theories. Maybe he knows more than he's saying. Maybe Brenda didn't just walk away. The scrutiny was suffocating. Lee's every move was examined. How he mowed the lawn, how he shopped for groceries, even how quickly he smiled or frowned in public. For years, Lee's life was a balancing act, shielding his children from gossip, answering investigators' relentless questions, and trying to hold together a family that felt broken beyond repair. At one point, police questioned him so aggressively that he felt more like a suspect than a grieving husband. He said later, "They wanted someone to blame, and when she vanished, I was the only one left standing." The financial strain was crushing too. With Brenda gone, her income from cleaning jobs vanished. Bills piled up. Lee worked longer hours, often returning home exhausted, only to face the disappointed faces of children still waiting for answers he couldn't give. The children struggled with more than grief. They struggled with identity. How do you explain to classmates that your mother simply vanished? Some kids were cruel, whispering that she must have run away because of them. Others said worse. Each rumor cut deeper, leaving scars invisible but lasting.
As the years passed, Brenda's absence reshaped their lives. The children grew into teenagers carrying a constant ache, their milestones haunted by what wasn't there. First dances, graduations, birthdays, moments that should have been celebrated with the mother's proud smile were instead tinged with silence. In 2010, when Brenda was declared legally dead, the pain deepened. It was a bureaucratic necessity, a piece of paper that allowed the family to move on financially, but emotionally it was devastating. For her children, it felt like erasing her. "She's not gone," one of them reportedly said. "She can't be." Lee remarried eventually, trying to rebuild a semblance of stability for himself and his kids. But the shadow of Brenda's disappearance never left. Every holiday carried an unspoken absence. Every family photo felt incomplete. Behind closed doors, anger simmered. The children struggled with feelings of abandonment. Some nights, the grief came out as tears. Other nights, as rage. Why did she leave us? Didn't she love us enough to stay? And yet, despite the pain, they carried on. They went to school, graduated, found jobs, built friendships. They learned to live with the whole because they had no choice. But even as they built new lives, the question never left them. What happened to Mom? For 11 long years, they lived in the shadow of that question. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that Brenda was alive all along. Not in another country, not in witness protection, not buried in some unmarked grave. She was wandering streets, eating from dumpsters, hiding behind a new name. The cruelest truth was that Brenda's children were grieving a mother who wasn't dead. They were living with trauma while she lived in hiding. When the truth finally came out, it wouldn't bring the closure they'd once hoped for. It would raise new wounds, new questions, and new anger. Because sometimes learning the truth is harder than living with the unknown.
By 2013, Brenda Heist had been missing for 11 years. Officially, she was dead. On paper, her family had moved on. But in reality, she was alive, worn down, weathered, and nearly unrecognizable. The years on the streets had taken their toll. Her once bright hair was now streaked with gray, her skin tanned and creased from years under the Florida sun. She carried the posture of someone always bracing against the next blow, the next night of hunger, the next question she didn't want to answer. But something inside her had shifted. She was tired, not just physically, but to the bone. Tired of hiding, tired of running, tired of carrying a secret that grew heavier with every passing day. The exact reasons that drove Brenda to resurface weren't a single moment, but a series of small ones that piled up until she could no longer bear the weight. She'd been sleeping under bridges, scrounging meals from trash bins, taking odd jobs when she could. She had been living not just in poverty, but in invisibility. One evening, she found herself standing in front of a store window, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was thin, tired, and beaten down. For the first time in years, Brenda admitted the truth to herself. This isn't living. This is surviving, and barely at that. She had heard rumors among the drifter community that police were cracking down on vagrancy in her area. The fear of being arrested under an assumed name, of being jailed without identification, gnawed at her. She thought of the warrants that might have been issued in Pennsylvania. She thought of her children, now adults, who had grown up without her. The guilt was unbearable. On a cool April morning in 2013, Brenda Heist made a decision. She walked into the Monroe County Sheriff's Office in Key Largo, Florida, and told the deputies behind the desk something that made them pause.
My name is Brenda Heist. I think I might be wanted in Pennsylvania. I disappeared 11 years ago. The deputies exchanged confused glances. Missing persons didn't walk in off the street every day. At first, they didn't believe her. She looked so different from the photos circulated years earlier. But Brenda insisted. She told them details only she could know. About her children, about her home in Leaditz, about the day she dropped them at school and never returned. Fingerprints confirmed the impossible. Brenda Heist, declared legally dead 3 years earlier, was standing in front of them, alive. News spread like wildfire. A woman who had vanished without a trace in 2002, whose case had baffled police and tormented her family, had reappeared on her own terms. For Brenda, walking into that sheriff's office was less about redemption and more about exhaustion. She later admitted, "I was just tired. Tired of hiding, tired of running, tired of not being me." But for her family, the resurfacing was not the miracle they might have once dreamed of. For them, it was a reopening of wounds that had never fully healed. Her children, now young adults, were confronted with a painful reality. Their mother hadn't been taken from them. She had left them, voluntarily. Investigators asked Brenda why. Why abandon her children? Why let them suffer for 11 years believing she was dead? Her answer was raw, if not satisfying. "I was overwhelmed. I thought I was failing. I thought everyone would be better off without me." It was the logic of despair, not reason, and it didn't ease the anger or the heartbreak left in her wake. The deputies in Florida processed her statement and passed the information to Pennsylvania authorities. For detectives who had filed Brenda's case away as unsolvable, the news was staggering. "You don't see this," one officer said. "Missing people don't just walk back in." But Brenda had. And her return would spark a storm of media coverage, of family anger, of public debate. Because in coming back, Brenda Heist forced everyone to confront the truth. She hadn't been stolen. She had chosen to disappear.
Within hours, the story leapt from Key Largo to Pennsylvania. Reporters scrambled. Headlines screamed the impossible. Missing Pennsylvania mother found alive after 11 years. Declared dead, Brenda Heist resurfaces in Florida. For a nation familiar with missing person cases ending in tragedy, Brenda's return was rare, a miracle on paper. But for those closest to her, it was far more complicated. Her ex-husband, Lee Heist, was among the first to react. By then, he had endured years of suspicion, whispered accusations, and the lonely burden of raising 2 children alone. He had remarried, trying to build something stable after living in the shadow of Brenda's absence. Now he was confronted with a truth both relieving and devastating. His wife hadn't been taken, she had chosen to leave. Lee's response was blunt. She abandoned her family. She walked away. He didn't sugarcoat his anger or shield his words. For years, he had lived under the unspoken question, did he do it? Now the answer was clear. He hadn't. But that clarity came with another sting. She had left him and their children to shoulder the chaos alone. For Brenda's children, the revelation cut even deeper. They were no longer the small, bewildered kids waiting at a school pickup line. They were adults now, shaped by a childhood haunted by absence. For them, her reappearance didn't bring joy. It reopened old wounds. Her daughter, then in her early 20s, didn't hold back. She said she felt abandoned, betrayed. She wasn't taken from us, she chose to leave us. The pain in her voice was unmistakable. The words sharp, the wound still bleeding after more than a decade. Her son, quieter but no less wounded, struggled to make sense of it. For years, he had wondered if his mother was out there, if she thought of him, if she loved him. Now he had an answer, and it wasn't the one he wanted.
Brenda Heist's disappearance and reappearance didn't just leave a mark on her family. It rippled through law enforcement, psychology, and the broader conversation about what it means to go missing. Her story became a strange kind of case study, one that forced people to look not only at crime, but at the quiet implosions of ordinary lives. When someone disappears, the narrative most people imagine is grim: a kidnapping, an assault, a murder. The mind doesn't jump to the possibility that a person might simply choose to vanish. Yet Brenda's case proved that sometimes disappearance is less about danger and more about despair. Law enforcement agencies across Pennsylvania admitted that her story forced them to rethink how they approached missing persons. For years, investigators had combed through evidence, convinced foul play must be involved. They had tracked phone records, bank statements, and even brought in FBI profilers. The idea that Brenda had simply walked away never sat well, because it was unthinkable that a mother of 2 would abandon her children voluntarily. But she had. And that challenged assumptions, not just about her, but about missing persons everywhere. Investigators pointed out how complicated these cases are. When there's no crime scene, no body, no trail, the search becomes a battle against shadows. It's one thing to investigate a homicide, one retired detective later said. It's another to chase a ghost. Brenda's ghost lingered for 11 years, and when she reappeared, it highlighted the painful truth that law enforcement can only go so far when someone doesn't want to be found. On a broader scale, her case shed light on the thousands of missing persons in America whose stories never reach the headlines. Each year, tens of thousands are reported missing. Some are victims of crime, others accidents. But a percentage, though small, vanish voluntarily. Brenda's case gave a face to that possibility, reminding the public that not all disappearances are the result of predators lurking in the dark. Sometimes, they are the result of people silently breaking under pressures no one else can see. And then, there was the impact on Lidditz itself.
For years, her face had been stapled to bulletin boards, her name spoken in prayers at church. Her vanishing had turned the small town into a place of whispers, theories, and suspicion. When she reappeared, many residents felt duped. They had grieved, they had organized, they had searched, and all along, she had been alive, surviving in Florida. For some, it felt like betrayal. For others, it was simply relief to have the truth at last.
Today, Brenda Heist is not a household name. Her story flickered briefly across headlines in 2013 before fading from the national spotlight. But in Lidditz, in the homes of her children, and in the minds of investigators, her name lingers like a question with no satisfying answer. Was she selfish, desperate, broken, or all three? Perhaps the truest reflection is this. Brenda Heist's story is not about a clean division between right and wrong. It's about the messiness of being human, about the choices made in moments of unbearable pressure, about the scars left behind when someone disappears, not only on the missing, but on those who are left to carry on. For her children, the legacy of her disappearance is not just the years without her, but the complicated truth of her return. They may never find closure in the conventional sense, but they have found resilience, forged in the fire of abandonment. And for the rest of us, her story is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that behind every smiling face, every school drop-off, every wave to a neighbor, there can be a storm no one else sees. That sometimes the people we think are the strongest are the ones silently unraveling. Brenda's story does not end with a courtroom gavel, or a killer unmasked, or a community avenged. It ends with a woman stepping into a sheriff's office, thin and tired, saying she was ready to stop running. It ends with a family forced to reconcile a truth they never asked for. It ends not with closure, but with a reminder. Disappearance is not always about crime. Sometimes it's about the fragile threads that hold us to the lives we build, and how easily those threads can snap. And so, as the dust settles on Brenda Heist's extraordinary case, the story remains what it always was: a mystery. Not of what happened, but of why. A mystery not written in crime scene evidence or forensic reports, but in the quiet, painful corners of the human heart.
If stories like this move you, and you want more real-life cases that reveal the truth behind the headlines, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss the next powerful story we bring to life.